Welcome to the FMCG guys. I'm Daniel Torres, joined by Efrain Rosario. Hello, Efrain. How are you?
Hey, Daniel. Good to be with you as always.
Excellent. So one of the star terms in the last few months in the consumer goods community in Europe has been retail media, which we've heard about a lot about in the US, a lot through our friends, the CPG guys who've been talking about it probably for the last 3 years practically, but now it's really hit the ground in Europe. But what does retail media exactly mean, Efrain?
Well, I think one is that we know that this is Shree's favorite topic on earth. So we've learned a lot from him in terms of listening to him talk about it and its development in the US. For me, the way that I try to think about our retail media is that it's in essence combining the core concept of media, albeit closer to the point of sale in terms of either through a retail partner or through some sort of third-party platform. But it's combining, in essence, what we've done traditionally from a media standpoint in terms of engaging with consumers and shoppers, but combining that with some of the data and the precision marketing capabilities that have come as a result of digital transformation, right? So it's how you, in essence, kind of combine those three things together to ultimately do what we've been doing for quite some time with regards to engaging with consumers and shoppers with the right content, but being able to do it in a more precise, measurable sort of way.
Yeah, absolutely. So to make sense of all this change of paradigm and understand how FMCG companies and brands can actually leverage this change, we have a very exciting guest. He's Moritz Hoffmann, joining us from Berlin, and he's leading retail media at one of Europe's top quick commerce players, Gorillas.
Yes. So my name is Moritz. I work at Gorillas as Senior Director Global Retail Media. So I look after our advertising business at the wider sense, and how we can collaborate with different FMCG and CPG brands and help them grow their business on platforms like Gorillas, and help them also to understand customers a bit more in depth. And this goes all the way from the commercial talks, from the extensive relationships that we have with the wider industry and the different brands, but also our product and tech suite essentially that we're building up, which we're also looking up into in my team.
Excellent.
Yeah. So Moritz, would love to hear just about your overall career as well in regards to what obviously it's a really interesting time to be with Gorillas and to be in the quick commerce industry. But tell us more about, some of the other things you've done over your career.
Yeah, because in a short amount of time, you've done a lot, I have to say.
Absolutely. You've packed it in.
Very, very compressed. So yeah, I mean, I've been with Gorillas now for 2 years, but before that, spent quite a lot of time in the food delivery or food tech industry. I started off working for a corporate investor in Germany, investing in food tech, in different technology platforms, but also in actual FMCG and CPG products. But from there, I switched the sites and joined Deliveroo, had a couple of roles at Deliveroo, from their ghost kitchen units up to operations, up to country strategies. Then worked for a German catering platform, Germany-based but active worldwide. Did a lot of M&A there. We were growing by acquisition, so I've helped to integrate these new acquired businesses into the company, not only from a process and organizational perspective, but mainly also from the tech perspective. So migrating everybody over to one commonly developed platform. From there, switched back into the delivery, into the customer delivery industry, but actually on the producer side, or even fully integrated side, as I've joined Domino's. And I was looking after the platform business of Domino's in Europe. So by platform business, I'm talking all the different aggregators in which Domino's lists themselves. So whether that's Just Eat, Deliveroo, Uber Eats, etc. And we've looked also there again after different topics, right? Everything from how can we integrate it properly into the day-to-day operations, from enhancing the APIs that send all the orders into the stores, so really operational topics on the ground together with different franchisees. But also the other way, how can we position a brand like Domino's properly on these different marketplaces, as this is one of the delivery brands that is out there in Europe and one of the strongest ones on those platforms. We want to make sure that we use this position and we actively engage with other aggregators to understand how we can not only cannibalize Gorillas, but really add incremental sales of Domino's, etc., on top as well. And then from there, I have the chance to switch over to Gorillas. And I've joined Gorillas firstly in the Germany team, build up and led the Germany team, led the expansion across Germany essentially. And then when we said, that seems to work in Germany, let's maybe pilot it and roll it out in a couple of other markets. Then I've switched to the global teams and build up the global teams. And the first month were really about, okay, let's try to kind of steer this cruise ship that is really driving with full force and probably a bit faster than it should be. So it was a lot about expansion and helping the different markets to grow, to establish, and to launch different procedures. And somehow then ended up always leading the relationship between our commercial teams and our product and tech teams, and making sure we actually build feasible products. We build out the different roadmaps for our consumer products, but also on different steering mechanisms internally, whether that's building our first pricing functions, our first promotion functions, but also more back office procedures like our master data management functions. And then we sat down by the end of last year, beginning of this year, together with our founder Khan. And obviously, as we all know, and as a listener to this podcast will potentially also know, retail, especially FMCG retail, is not a high margin business, right? It's a low margin, high volume business. But you want to make sure, especially if you're such a newly launched company, that you optimize your cash flow operations. So we discussed and we wanted to find out, okay, how can we increase our margin mix? And we came up with a couple of future bets that we wanted to invest into. These were private label, these were a couple of other things that we looked into, and this was also advertising. And we kind of put our heads together to what should we focus on, what should we launch, and what kind of organizational framework do we want to kick this off. And then we launched a few of them, and then it came very, very viable that one of the most interesting ones and most ones we wanted to invest into was retail media, or from internally spoken, our advertising business, that we develop features that help them brands grow themselves in return for them buying media and data essentially with Gorilla. So I took that function over, and since then grew to what it is today.
Yeah, which you're currently heading up retail media, which is a term that I know in the US has been talked about for quite a while. I think that post-pandemic, like when pandemic started, it did a kind of boom there. I mean, at least coming from our friends, the CPG guys, our sister podcast in the US, they've been talking about that for now a couple of years, or 3 years actually. But here in Europe, I think it's done more a boom in the last 6 months, which coincidentally, Moritz, is when you've actually taken over this retail media responsibility. What is the potential of retail media? I mean, how did it start? And what's the origin of it? And maybe later we can go a bit through like the development of it as well.
Yeah. Essentially, and even technically, retail media is nothing new that was just discovered 6 months ago in Europe and 2 years ago in the US, right? It's more of merging different things together that have been there before, but in different industries, different tactics, and they now kind of find each other on the same plate. So it's just really taking the core concept of established online and offline media tactics, and then combining it or linking it even to the point of sale online at a retailer. So, I mean, obviously, we've seen a strong growth of e-commerce in the last couple of years, both in the US, but also in other sectors, also in Germany, obviously. And with e-commerce growth coming in, obviously, there's also maybe a bit delayed demand of how can you advertise next to that e-com growth. So it's more of a logical development of what has happened the last couple of years. But I mean, previously it was called different. I think Amazon is doing it since 10, 15 years already, if not more, just simply call it Amazon advertising. It's just allowing brands to advertise at the point of sale. And in that case, the point of sale is not anywhere somewhere in a grocery store, but it's simply the marketplace or the online platform where groceries are bought. And I mean, it really came then with the benefit that it provided or it solves at least a certain problem that has always been there in marketing, which is the measure what you do, right? So combining the possibility to now having the chance to measure your media tactics in FMCG retail, at least the area that I'm focusing on, which previously was, if you look at purely the offline world, very hard to do and very happy to attribute it to individual persons and to individual tactics that are executed. But now really having those measurable media tactics that are able to be placed directly at the POS where the customer is and intends to shop and make a transaction, probably this then merged together with a strong growth on the overall topic of e-commerce that probably led to the big buzz that is out there in the last couple of months.
Yeah, I really like, Moritz, how you articulated that, which is that it's combining some, let's call it, core concepts of how we thought about retail activation with the data and the precision that online brings to the party. Because for those of us of a certain age, we can think back to the late 90s and the early 2000s to loyalty card programs, and it was in a way very similar to what we're talking about today. Through people like Gorillas and the Amazons of the world. I'd love to ask, even in the short time that you've been leading up the retail media initiative at Gorillas, you've probably seen it evolve even in that short amount of time. Can you talk us a little bit through the different stages of that evolution in terms of how retail media has continued to expand and grow?
Yeah, sure. We when we started it off, obviously me not having a media background, plus also the people that I took from my previous teams with me barely had a strong media background. Some have worked in similar industries before, but nobody came in and we were like, okay, we know media, we need to do this. So we had to learn a lot. So we started it off with tons of in-depth research. We've spoke to, I think, 15, 20, and 25 retailers or so, brands, and analyzed them in the absolute core depth. And across different teams, from their marketing teams, their media teams, their performance teams, their commercial teams, their BI teams. And we've really went through them trying to understand what is it that they need, what is it that they want. At that time, we didn't even use the topic retail media. We just wanted to create a new channel for Gorillas to collect revenue with. And we want to understand how want brands to deploy the money potentially in channels like Gorillas. So we did that in-depth research, really, really long interviews. I think we have tons of documentation on this. And then we really understood the first place for us to start is just simply data transparency. So understand giving the brands the opportunity to understand how they are performing on our channel. Because if you are a retailer like us, at least in the beginning, you're always shopping directly at the retailer. You're sometimes shopping by the wholesalers. Sometimes you're purchasing directly. You sometimes don't know where your products are up to. So really giving the transparency to those brands to allow them to understand how they are performing essentially in our channel. The second question that then came up next to very, very top line questions. Okay, but how is my category performing? How is the category mix looking like? Obviously they know their classic sales that they do in a classic offline retail. They know their customer behavior there. But obviously there's a reason why this channel emerged so much, because it was an unmet demand in the industry that had different consumer behavior next to it. So they want to understand what categories are important, how are these categories developing, how are they performing against the leaders in their categories or even their peers. And the third question was, okay, how are their consumers interacting with their products, right? So how are they navigating the different apps? What is their spending behavior, etc. So we put all of this together in a platform that we built where brands can log in and really draw those conclusions by themselves. Of course, the data that was available at that time on the market to purchase on how Q-commerce is performing essentially, and not only on the top line performance level, but really on the in-depth of different behavior metrics was simply not there. So for them, it was really, really big black box, which led to them not being able to deploy an own strategy on how to interact with players like ours, because they were just talking to people at brands like Gorillas, but also other Q-com players in the industry, but they really couldn't look into that black box essentially. So we built that platform where, as a brand, you can log in and you can basically see live data on different metrics, different packages, etc., of what you were trying to do. And this was really the underlying base work for us to get started with, because you want the brand to get an idea and match their own strategy to how they would like to perform, and match it against to how the market is essentially evolving. So we started off with that. And then by them starting to understand their performance, they actively came to us and asked, hey, okay, we would like to do this. We would like to advertise the newly launched product that we're having. We don't want to do a lot of test and learns. We want to see how different groups are reacting, a lot of different A and B tests. And then we started off with a couple of real estate media media tactics, essentially, that we collaborated with them, that we allowed them to grow. We usually put them in different categories. Some are more for growth, some are more for awareness, some are purely for sales improvement, etc. And then we just started with them, and ended up with a big pile, or with a big toolbox, essentially, of assets that we now deploy. And we're now at the stage where we're saying, hey, okay, we know how this. I don't want to say we know how this works, because we definitely not have cracked the cake. But we know what we need to do in the next couple of steps. We're now preparing us to get to the next level and really bring this up for scale.
Yeah. And what I take from the process that you described as you guys went through it is that, I think naturally when you work in that kind of startup environment, as Gorillas is, it's done in a very agile sort of way, right? And which can be a bit different than the way like a lot of brands tend to operate. I'm curious to know when you were setting up the platform and you were, walking through the phases that you just talked us through, did you work with a couple of select brands as pilots in terms of setting that up before you then kind of codified it and scaled it to be able to share it more broadly?
100%. I wouldn't go as. I just wanted to say that we did co-development with the brands. It was not that extensive that both parties coded, but we always work for every product and for every feature that we ship. We always work together with a handful of selected brands that then get very early access, not even access. They actually sit together with our product engineering team in our sprint cycles, and then they have a say in how the roadmap essentially is defined. So we are actually very transparent with this, and we actually let them influence our product roadmap very intensively, because they are going to be the end user of this at the end of the day. They are going to be the ones who are going to be using the services, using the products that we build. So they actively take influence and such. And there are brands out there who have really strong people in our counterparts sitting there, and they are very curious and very, very feedback heavy to collaborate. And then depending on what feature is and who raised that, essentially, we reach out to them. And then we sit down with them and we let them influence us, like actively. So everything we ship is always in collaboration with brand. I don't think we shipped a single feature on my team where not a single brand has been involved in the alpha release or on the beta release, gave their feedback. And whether it's about, we want to get our logo somewhere in there. So we end up customizing some landing pages so that the different brands also have their own logos in there to show around. But they actually come up with handy features that we wouldn't think about. I remember one thing is in our data platform, we have the opportunity to actually directly open up or extract an automated presentation. So, if you look at our dashboards, you can obviously take your learnings from that. But if you're sitting on the key account position of the brand side, you're obviously sitting at an evolving team, an innovation team most of the time. You're not bringing in the big value or the big volume that you do at the classic offline retailer. So we always try to prove your point. You try to make quick wins and try to get attention in the company to get more investment into your teams. So you need something to showcase, something to show. So our counterparts, a lot of time they need to pull presentations together, report their sales metrics, so have something to show always. And we actually embedded just a button where you can automatically, from all the dashboards that you have, extract a PowerPoint file that is then a presentation that looks the same every week. And you basically can extract that. You have a ready-to-go presentation with your performance of Gorillas from the previous week, and you can go around and show it around your company, which is something that came from them, which probably we wouldn't have thought about, because we thought, okay, there's a nice dashboard. You can have a look at it. But so these small things that come up when you talk with them, and you kind of have these ready to go now.
I think it's interesting with retail media, and I know you and I have talked about that before, Moritz, but the whole dynamic of retailer and brand will really change. Ironically, because one could argue that with retail media, the retailer has more power even, but in some way, I remember you made me see this, the retailer is also selling to the brand, where it had always been the brand selling to the retailer, right? How do you see this dynamic of relationship between manufacturers, FMCG players, brand, call it as you will, and retailer?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at it in that's called, I don't want to call it historical consensus because that sounds so big, but historically you always had a very clear buyer side and you had a very clear seller side, and the sides at the table were very clearly defined, and the relationship kind of really was driven into a lot of strong negotiations about logistics costs, buying margins, etc. But one side, every side was very, very clear set at the table. Now, with the retailer moving into a seller role and the brand as itself moving into a buyer role, you're kind of mixing everything up. Plus, you're bringing much more parties to the table, right? Where previously you only had the exchange mainly between the commercial teams or the supply chain teams and category management or buying teams and the seller teams and commercial teams at the brand side of the table. You now really bringing to the table marketing, media, business intelligence, data science, product engineering from both parties. So you're suddenly talking about a much more diverse, a much wider group that sits at the table and starts to form partnership, because not only one is the clear seller, both are sellers and both are buyers. So simply by definition, there's the need to actually form a partnership. So the relationship as itself gets really elevated to a completely new level. As you really need to, I mean, you don't need to compromise, but you need to compromise to a certain extent, of course, always. But you're kind of having different angles in that negotiation suddenly. So you really need to you need to collaborate, otherwise the topic doesn't go anywhere. And especially as it's so early stages, it completely redefines the dynamics in the entire industry. At least that's how I feel it.
Yeah, I and this is actually a theme that has come up on some of our other episodes as well, in regards to driving towards greater collaboration between retailers and brands. And I really like how you've, in essence, almost like, let's say, flipped the formula, if you will, in regards to the traditional roles that brands and retailers play. But like you said, collaboration is key. Right, and co-creation,
yep,
as you articulated before. I'm curious, as somebody who has worked, from my perspective, I'm personally curious as somebody who's worked more on the brand side to hear your point of view as a retailer. What do you think are the 2 to 3 key things that brands can really, in essence, glean from "quote unquote" retail media?
I think the by far biggest point is the transparency on how customers interact with your products on the retailer side, and then being able to effectively but also efficiently influence such. So really getting a full transparency across the entire funnel. So in an ideal world where retail media is really set up in the best possible way, you can really see the entire customer journey, from the point where a lead generation has been done, where the lead came from, how they clicked on it, what was the content that was driving it, up until the discovery process, then on the actual marketplace or list of items, to then how did it land to a conversion, where they were triggered from, where they're triggered by a banner on the place, where did the product get added from, did it come from search, from recommendation, maybe from a shop, and then also track the post-purchasing behavior or even the entire retention, obviously. So you're really getting a full transparency on how customers are navigating for your products. And this is the underlying foundation then for you to build up products that allows you to advertise accordingly next to it. And therefore, as it's measurable, making it simply more efficient, because you can really track how you're spending your money and what your very, very clear return on advertising spend is at the end of the day. So it's really that full transparency. But then obviously also using those data points that you're collecting and enriching yourself with first-party data, right? And this first-party data that you're building up with tracking on an online merchant, you can then use and really build audiences to improve your advertising spend outside of the platform, right? You can then really use those data to build audiences and optimize your social ads that you're placing somewhere out, because you know who might be interested in such products, you know their behavior, how they interact at the POS, and therefore make all of your not all of you, but quite a big chunk of your advertising spend outside of the actual retail media platform much more efficient, and really drive value from there. So retail media does not, as if from looking from the brand side, it does not only help you at the specific retailer, but it really enriches the information that you have or you need in order to really drive up your marketing skill level at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. So, and I think lastly, depending on what media tactic we're talking about, but it's the ability to optimize in real time, right? It's like real-time measurement, real-time optimization, which you can do to a certain extent on social platforms, but at least with retailers, it has been, at least in the past, very difficult to instantly place out certain ads, instantly change ads, put in a new copy, put in a new image, change around certain products that you want to promote very easily, just basically within a click. So the opportunity to optimize in real time, I think, also comes with a big benefit. Also, simply for quickly testing hypotheses and making quick learnings along the way.
No, it's interesting how retail media also. It's a kind of dialogue. It's not a static publicity. It's more of a dialogue, no? Where apart from sending your message to the consumer, your consumer is also telling you what they want ultimately, no?
Yeah. 100%.
And for Gorillas, which is obviously a quick commerce player, so in other words, it's more of a convenience value proposition, if you like, where you get your grocery products delivered in 15 minutes. How does retail media in Gorillas differentiate from retail media in a more conventional retailer?
Yeah, I think obviously you're attracting a different target group. You're speaking to different clients by the baseline of it. But I mean, I can't talk that much about competitors. But what we're always trying to do is at least build a product that is very customer driven. And by customer driven, I mean towards the actual customer that is buying our product, which in our case is the brand, but it's the same way how Gorillas got built, essentially, right? Gorillas got built because there has been a need in the market that was not met. There has been very little innovation in the food retail market in the European areas in the last 20, 30, 40 years. And that unmet demand was so big that simply in 2 years, a rather big industry actually could evolve in Europe within a very, very short amount of time. And if you look back on the origin of Gorillas, how it was built, I mean, I think the first year we didn't look at nothing else except for how can we optimize customer experience. And like even to the stage where we were in the store and like on the very early orders we delivered. And I mean, Gorillas is primed for delivering cold drinks, right? The majority of the drinks that we sell, they're chilled actually in the store. And if we felt like we just restocked the fridge and the drinks were not cold enough, and even not to the standard where we think, okay, that should be if you order a cold beer on a Saturday afternoon, then we went to the convenience shop next door, just had an arrangement with them that we could get their cold beers quickly. We stocked our beers in their fridges as an exchange, and then essentially used their cold beers and stacked them in the order so that the customer at the end would get a cold beer. And the same thing we're trying to do in building our retail media products. So really understanding what is it that the industry wants, what is that the brand wants, and after that, building our entire product roadmap. Which obviously it's sometimes, I mean, you need to maneuver through a lot of opinions. I mean, if you talk with the brands, they're established players in the industry, and they have tons of knowledge, and they all have their opinions, and they usually differ quite a bit between the different brands. So it's obviously about who should we prioritize, or what product should be prioritized. But for us, like the core concept is let's make sure we really nail the customer experience and we really understand what it is that they want and that helps them.
Yeah. It's been fascinating to hear you talk about, in essence, the growth or the evolution of Gorillas as a company. I remember back to when I first saw Gorillas as a consumer advertising in Paris, actually. So it is really amazing to see how you guys have grown and expanded across all of Europe. And you know, like you said, the role that retail media has played in regards to becoming almost like a new line of business for Gorillas as well, but still done with, like you said, within the ethos of what the company and the brand the Gorilla stands for, which is being very customer driven. So, thank you again for sharing all that. I had one final question to ask you. And this is a question that we ask all of our guests, which is, given all the experiences you've had in your career, what's the one piece of advice that you would give your younger self if you go back in time and do that?
I mean, if I go back to me being 18, 19, it's definitely chill out. And so it's gonna work in some form or another. But I mean, something that actually I wished I would have done earlier, or I would have done even better, is learning to code as early as possible. And I'm not even talking about like proper back-end coding or so, but some things that gets you along the way, right? So learning a bit of SQL earlier on, but also learning. In theory, I had Python courses in university. I think I had to recollect some of that knowledge afterwards and in my practical life. But I think this helps you massively, especially in early stage of the career, because you can solve problems early on very well. I mean, I had some people in my team who were they were not coders, but they had some substantial knowledge in just simply, SQL is very basic, but then also in just simply writing a couple of Python scripts. It just simply elevates the things that you produce so much, because you just simply produce scalable features directly from the start. And I think there are some great tools out there to learn it by yourself online if you want. Different websites or YouTube. And if you get your hands on this as early as possible, I think this can be a Kickstarter for everybody. And then the second piece is probably just talk to people. Talk a lot and be curious. I usually tend to do that. I just talk a lot. I'm a very talkative person most of the time. But it's asking questions and asking a question, what do people want? And then usually if you get a good grasp of their motivation, and what it is that they want to achieve, and you can support them, it kind of pays back usually.
This was Moritz Hoffmann from Gorillas. Ephraim, what are your takeaways from this discussion about retail media from the retailer's perspective?
Well, I think it's interesting, first off, that Gorillas isn't your traditional retailer, both in terms of their go-to-business model, but I think just in terms of how they've built their retail media offering as well. So for me, it was really fascinating to hear Moritz walk us through that evolution in terms of, since he's kind of been there from day one, in terms of building that functionality or that platform, moving from thinking about, let's call it more research type of offerings with brands, to then really saying, how do I offer more transparency in terms of performance for those brands on our platform on Gorillas, to then really getting into deeper insights around consumer behavior and category trends, but ultimately then evolving into being able to do live tests with brands around things like A/B tests or certain media metrics. I think, for the people in our audience who are working at an FMCG brand, all of that has to sound really exciting in regards to the world of possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that I found super, super interesting is the fact that retailers are offering retail media to brands really changes the relationship of retailers and FMCG companies in the way that it's more multilateral. And it means that more departments have to be involved in digital. It's what Andrew Pearl from Profitero called democratization when he joined us on a LinkedIn Live a few weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more people you can bring to the party around digital, the more critical mass you can build internally with regards to being able to drive the transformation. So I think, that's definitely a bonus for brands who are playing in this space. I also found it, actually, to that point, we're building on that, really interesting to hear Moritz share about how they've in essence taken a really deliberate stance in regards to co-creation with brands as well. And he talked about building their roadmap in regards to functionality around their retail media platform jointly with strategic FMCG brand partners. And I think, again, that's got to be music to the ears of a lot of the brands, right, who are looking to do this, because if you have the opportunity to influence the capability or the functionality that you're able to access through a retail media platform, and you're able to shape that with your input, I think that's great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I hope the audience felt this episode was as interesting as we felt it was. I definitely learned a lot because I'm not that familiar with retail media. So it was good to hear from Moritz. Thanks to our audience again for listening to us. Remember to follow us on LinkedIn if you're not yet. You can also follow our colleagues from the CPG guys at the other side of the Atlantic. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next episode.